Something broke on June 25, 2026. Apple walked into its own store and raised prices overnight. Not on a single product, on everything. MacBooks, iPads, the Vision Pro, HomePods, Apple TV, all of it. The MacBook Neo jumped from $599 to $699. The MacBook Air went from $1,099 to $1,299. The iPad Air from $599 to $749. Apple stock fell 6.1%, its worst single-day drop in over a year, erasing $263 billion in market value before the closing bell. Tim Cook, speaking to the Wall Street Journal, called it a 100-year flood and said he had never seen anything like it in more than 4 decades in the industry. Apple's official statement was equally stark. We have never seen a component price increase this much, this quickly. One word explains all of it: memory. And what Apple decided to do in response may reshape the semiconductor industry in ways that aren't fully visible yet, but that are already setting off alarms from Seoul to Washington. To feel why Apple did something so historically unusual, you need to understand what happened to memory, not in abstract terms, in real ones. Dynamic Random Access Memory, DRAM, is the working brain of everything. It's inside your laptop, your phone, the servers running the AI tools you used this morning, the hospital machines monitoring patients, the cars making decisions at 60 miles per hour. For 3 decades, its price moved in one direction: down. That was the deal. Technology scaled. Efficiency compounded. Memory got cheaper, devices got more capable, and the market expanded. Everyone won. That deal broke in 2026. DRAM contract prices surged 90% in the first quarter of 2026 alone compared to the previous quarter. TrendForce projected a further 58% to 63% jump by the second quarter. Memory and storage prices quadrupled over 3 consecutive quarters according to Counterpoint Research. IDC called it an unprecedented inflection point and warned the shortage could last well into 2027. This is not a bad quarter, it is a structural rupture. It was caused by artificial intelligence. Training a large AI model, the kind powering the tools used by hundreds of millions of people every day, requires enormous volumes of high bandwidth memory, or HBM. These are precision-built chips where multiple memory dies are stacked vertically, fused together, and mounted directly beside AI processors so data can travel at extreme speeds. They are extraordinarily valuable. A single HBM module sells for $60 to $100. An equivalent amount of conventional consumer DRAM sells for $5 to $10. When you run a factory and one product earns 10 times more than another, you make the expensive one. By 2026, Samsung, SK hynix, and Micron, the 3 companies that collectively produce 90 to 95% of all DRAM on Earth, had shifted 93% of their combined production capacity toward AI data center memory. HBM was consuming 23% of total global DRAM wafer output. The consumer electronics market was left fighting over what remained. SK hynix posted record quarterly revenue of roughly $35.5 billion, fueled almost entirely by AI demand. Samsung's semiconductor division reported $36.1 billion in operating profit in a single quarter, 94% of the entire company's earnings. Micron's gross margin jumped from 39% to 84.9% in a year, surpassing even Nvidia. These 3 companies were generating extraordinary wealth. Their customers were not. Apple said the situation had become unsustainable. Microsoft raised Xbox prices. Valve launched the Steam machine at $300 above its originally intended price. Elon Musk said Tesla had hit a chip wall. And on June 25, 2026, 17 plaintiffs filed a class action lawsuit in a California federal court accusing Samsung, SK Hynix, and Micron of colluding to restrict conventional DRAM supply, driving a cumulative 700% price increase over 4 years under the cover of the AI transition. The companies deny any collusion. Legal experts say the case will take years to resolve and won't change supply dynamics in the short term. But the lawsuit captured something real. When 3 companies control 90% of something the world cannot function without, the entire world is at their mercy. And Apple, the most valuable technology company on earth, had just proved it wasn't immune. What Apple did next is the part of this story that most people missed. On the same day it apologized publicly for raising prices, Tim Cook was privately lobbying Washington. According to Reporting First by the Financial Times and confirmed by Bloomberg, Apple had been pressing the Trump administration for weeks, contacting the Commerce Department more than a month before the price hike went live, and making personal appeals to Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. The ask was specific: political cover to buy memory chips from a Chinese company called Changshin Memory Technologies, better known as CXMT. CXMT was founded in 2016 in Hefei, China, a decade after the memory industry's survivors had already locked in generational advantages in scale, process knowledge, and customer relationships. It entered a race that most observers considered already over. And then it started running. By the first quarter of 2025, it had grown to approximately 6% of global DRAM output. By 2026, its market share reached roughly 8%. Its DDR5 modules, running at speeds up to 8,000 megatransfers per second, had already appeared inside branded Corsair memories sold to consumers, confirming that a respected international brand was willing to stake its warranty on CXMT silicon. The company is expanding production capacity from 200,000 to 300,000 wafers per month by the end of 2026, supplying Lenovo and preparing a roughly $5 billion IPO on the Shanghai Stock Exchange. Apple does not need CXMT to be larger than Samsung. It needs CXMT to be credible enough to change the conversation at the negotiating table. There is a problem. CXMT is on the Pentagon's Section 1260H list, the Defense Department's roster of Chinese companies believed to have ties to the People's Liberation Army. The list carries no automatic legal ban on private commercial transactions, but it is a signal and a consequential one. Companies that build supply chains around 1260H listed firms live under constant risk that the Commerce Department could escalate those firms to full entity list status at any time, triggering restrictions that would invalidate whatever supply agreements existed overnight. Apple has lived through exactly that scenario before. In 2022, it explored sourcing storage chips from Yangtze Memory Technologies for iPhones sold in China. Congressional opposition was fierce. The Biden administration tightened export controls. Apple walked away. YMTC was added to the entity list months later. That experience is precisely why Apple is knocking on Washington's door now rather than simply signing contracts. It wants a guarantee that CXMT won't be escalated before Apple has recovered even its qualification costs. That guarantee is not arriving easily. Representative John Moolenaar, chairman of the House Select Committee on China, told the Financial Times that Apple partnering with a Chinese military company would be a grave mistake. Senator Marco Rubio echoed the warning. The Hudson Institute said the move runs counter to U.S. objectives for technology supply chain decoupling from China. The White House has not publicly commented. No deal has been signed. Apple is suspended in a political space with no clear resolution, a trillion-dollar company waiting for permission it may never receive to buy chips from a company that barely existed a decade ago. Meanwhile, Samsung and SK Hynix in Seoul are watching carefully. The revenue per bit from conventional DRAM is projected to surge. Samsung's up 116% year-on-year, SK Hynix's up 78%, Micron's up 54%. These numbers only exist because there is no serious alternative supplier. Apple's interest in CXMT is a direct message that the alternative may be arriving. Not to replace Samsung, to make Samsung nervous. And a nervous Samsung is a Samsung that negotiates differently. Korean analysts are already treating Apple's move as a strategic warning shot, not merely a procurement inquiry. The deeper story behind all of this is about what happens when the geopolitical ambitions of nations become entangled inside the supply chains of private companies. The United States spent years erecting barriers to Chinese semiconductor advancement, controls on lithography machines, restrictions on advanced chip designs, efforts to build allied supply chains. Those efforts were real, but they focused heavily on one layer of the chip stack: the transistors, the leading edge logic, the nanometers. Meanwhile, companies like CXMT were quietly ascending a different layer entirely: conventional memory, the essential, unglamorous kind that keeps the world running. And now Apple is at Washington's door asking permission to buy from them, not out of ideology, not out of preference, but out of necessity. Jefferies projects memory prices rising another 40% to 50% in the third quarter of 2026 alone, followed by a further 30% to 40% in the fourth quarter. IDC forecasts average PC selling prices growing 17% across the year. Meaningful new capacity from Micron's Singapore expansion and SK Hynix's new South Korean plant will not arrive until 2027 or 2028. There is no quick exit from this moment. Tim Cook has navigated trade wars and pandemics and supply crises that would have broken lesser companies. He called this a 100-year flood, and he is not given to exaggeration. The memory shortage of 2026 is not an inconvenient quarter. It is evidence that the AI revolution, the one everyone celebrated, the one that made a handful of companies some of the most profitable in human history, is now sending its costs downstream, rewriting the price of the devices ordinary people hold in their hands. The chips inside your next MacBook are at the center of a battle being fought in boardrooms in Cupertino and Hefei, in committee rooms in Washington, and in the quietly escalating confrontation between the world's two largest economies. A battle about who makes the memory the world runs on, about whether the answer to that question is allowed to change, and about who gets to decide. Apple wants China's memory, Samsung could lose billions, and the rest of us are already paying for the war. If you want to follow how this plays out, every supply chain move, every diplomatic shift, every factory that opens, and every policy that drops, subscribe to the channel and like the video. There is a lot more coming.